Page 8. Nine. 10. 11. 12. 13. 14. 15. 16. 17. Quite comprehensive. If there are no omissions or amendments to the minutes, I now ask that the minutes be confirmed. Member Cuthbert, seconded by Dr. Ferguson. Thank you. At this time, we will be inviting for presentations for the private members motion number 61. We'll be inviting Partnership for Women's Health and Well-Being to make their presentation.
Thank you very much. Members of Parliament, of course, Acting Chair, Mr. Michael Stewart. I wish to also acknowledge those in the gallery. And I wish to acknowledge the men and women who have lived and died fighting for women's rights and bodily autonomy, and those who are still fighting today. We would have hoped that more members of Parliament, and especially the members of the committee, of this committee, would have been present at these important hearings, considering the impact of this on women's lives. However, we do thank those members here present and those who have usually attended. My name is Shakira Maxwell, and beside me is Joan French, and we are from the Partnership for Women's Health and Well-Being. The partnership comprises a group of pro-choice men and women whose central tenet is the provision of safe and affordable abortion services to Jamaican women. We are nonpartisan and focus on safe abortion choices for women in the early term. We recognize that while women have continued to die from unsafe abortions, there has been an overall lack of political will. No government administration, either PNP or JLP, has so far had the courage to support women on this issue, legalizing facilities to safe abortions. Women continue to die in the effort to control their reproduction amid the wide range of adverse circumstances that lead to unwanted pregnancies. We reiterate that the law needs to be changed. We strongly support the motion presented by Member Juliet Cuthbert-Flynn, and we applaud this very courageous move to save women's lives and to ensure that Jamaica continues along its trajectory towards the empowerment of women. We also support the recommendations made by the Abortion Policy Review Group, chaired by the late Dr. Wynette Patterson, with minor revisions which do not change the substance of the recommendations. We emphasize that these recommendations do not propose abortion on demand. We are supporting the termination of a pregnancy under specific circumstances prior to 12 weeks gestation. we also recognize conscientious objections by medical providers. Women have been having abortions for centuries and make this choice because of a range of diverse issues and adverse circumstances that affect their lives. Currently, they are dying from unsafe abortions because of the current law. And in instances where they do not die, many suffer severe consequences. Most of us know someone who has had an abortion. Do we really want them to go to prison for this decision? The World Health Organization estimates that some 22,000 abortions are performed in Jamaica each year. A publication by McCall-Binns in 2018 spoke to the fact that the outcomes from unsafe abortions were the third direct cause of maternal mortality in Jamaica, with teenagers most at risk. Are we as a nation going to continue with an old draconian law which fails to provide women with their basic human rights? It is important to remember that many women are unable to negotiate safe sex practices. As a result, pregnancy is often not a question of choice. The everyday dynamics of gender relations means that many women are subject to either forced sexual contact or face violence if they refuse sexual advances. The statistics on violence against women tells us that women remain vulnerable. Let us also remember that in the context of their inability to protect themselves, and with women's responsibilities for others, particularly other children and the elderly, many women are even less able to protect themselves against pregnancy or to cope with having a child. The evidence has shown that in countries where abortion has been legalized, maternal mortality and morbidity rates have fallen. They will initially appear to rise because the previous illegality would have led to underreporting. We show in this example on the slide the case of Romania, where we see a dramatic decrease in the rate of maternal mortality once abortion was legalized in the 1990s. We see that prior to abortion services being made legal, hundreds of women lost their lives. What does this tell us? That having access to safe and affordable abortion services saves women's lives. We also use the example of the United States, where while initially there was a rise in the reported numbers of abortions, after Roe versus Wade, we see a dramatic decrease. We see a fall once women also have better access to family planning and counseling services. And the graphical representation here shows that the US abortion rate in 2014 was at its lowest since legalization, with the landmark Roe versus Wade. It is important to point out that Levia has stated that legalization must also be combined with access to safe abortion through better medical care in order to guarantee a reduction of maternal mortality. In 2004, the government of Jamaica, under then Minister of Health John Jr., established the Abortion Policy Review Group, chaired by Dr. Patterson, and with representatives from 13 agencies. The recommendations by this review group promote safety. They also highlight the fact that proper orientation and preparation of the health system is key, as was shown in the case of Barbados. The following, as demonstrated on the slide, are the recommendations by the review group. The change to a civil law, conducted within the health system by a qualified medical practitioner, not recommended beyond 12 weeks, counseling to be provided, confidentiality to be paramount, special provisions for minors, and the Ministry of Health to monitor. The partnership adds a few additional recommendations to those made by the review group. We recommend centers for therapeutic abortions to be integrated into the public health facilities and not stand-alone clinics. The type of counseling to be offered must ensure that providers recognize and accommodate the woman's decision-making powers according to her own individual conscience, and that practitioners who have a conscientious objection should be obligated to refer the patient to another qualified medical practitioner expeditiously. The state has a history of action in relation to the matter of abortion. The provision and protection of women's rights to maternal health are enshrined in the 2007 to 2010 Ministry of Health National Strategic Action Plan and the Strategic Framework for Safe Motherhood for 2007 to 2011, which both make the link between abortions and maternal mortality. Jamaica has also made commitments at the international level to protect women's reproductive health. The Beijing Platform for Action, the International Conference on Population and Development, Program for Action, the World Conference on Human Rights, and the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women. Members, they all address issues of reproductive health and rights and the protection of women's health. Please let us not drag our feet any longer. We know the problem. Please implement the solution and save women's lives. The current status of abortions exposes women to stigma and discrimination. Women should not be punished for what is already a difficult decision about their body, their life, and their future. Denying women access to medical services that enable them to regulate their fertility or terminate an unwanted or dangerous pregnancy amounts to a refusal to provide health care that only women need. Repealing the prohibitive provisions under the Offences Against the Persons Act concerning abortion, as recommended by the Policy Review Group, would restore this right to women and prevent further stigmatization and gender discrimination. We cannot continue to debate on when life begins, as the scientific data and interpretation on this varies along the religious spectrum. Let us focus on the children that are here and let us care for them. The issue of abortion, we recognize, is extremely complicated, but it speaks to matters of public health and the issue of rights. It is a decision which is personal. It is not, in the majority of cases, taken lightly. Women must have the final say on what happens to their bodies. They must have choice. Why is the state continuing to regulate women's bodies? Women must be appreciated. They must be respected. Let us be on the right side of history. As long as abortion remains illegal, women will continue to die because they will seek out services which jeopardize their lives. Please, members, save women's lives. I thank you very much for listening. Chair, the partnership also has some documents we would like to be shared with the committee, and with your permission, may we ask the clerk to distribute to the members.
Please go ahead.
We thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Shakaira Maxwell, for your presentation. Are there any questions, members, or concerns from her presentation?
Just want to thank Mrs. Maxwell for her presentation. I think the committee, we have been listening for most of the presentations we have had so far have been more anti-abortion, and at the last meeting I had asked that, that we'll have had the opportunity to hear the other side of the story, even as members of the committee would have their personal views, and some would have views influenced by our own constituency. But now I think it is an opportunity to, and that is what I think the function of this committee, Chairman, to is not so much a debate as it is to hear the stories, and where we need clarity, we ask for such clarity. But eventually, the debate will start in earnest once we have all this body of information. And as I've said before, and I will repeat, Chairman, if this matter was simple, we would have resolved it long time. And it is not a Jamaica matter, it's not a regional matter, it's a global matter that countries and states have argued about. And I do believe that, based on information, in due course, I believe that our Parliament must also have the courage to take the kind of decision. And I know it was raised as to whether it was going to be a conscience vote or whether it is going to be that the whip in both political parties would be on members. But I really believe that the essence of this kind of committee and the deliberation is for us to have the facts against the background of our own knowledge and research. And in the final analysis, we come to a position.
Thank you, Member Ferguson, for your intervention there. Member Flynn.
I also wanted, through you, Chair, to thank Ms. Maxwell for your presentation. I think it was very precise. And I just have a question, because I think a lot of people believe that once, if it is that this law is repealed, this Offences Against a Persons Act, that the floodgate is just going to open up where women will just, go out, get pregnant, and have an abortion. What would you say to that?
Thank you very much for the question. At the root of this discussion is the issue of how women
just
as citizens...
an intervention there. Could you just...
Joan French, sorry.
For the records. Thank you.
Joan French. At the root of the discussion is how women as adults are seen in terms of decision making. Whether we are going to be seen as citizens with equal rights to decide about our bodies and ourselves, or whether we are going to be continually told what we are to do or controlled by people who do not live in or live with our bodies. And I think it goes to the essence of equal rights for women. It is possible that any law can be abused on the fringes. But I think that in general, the movement to regulation and liberalization reduces the harm that can happen to the majority who have need for these services. So we are not able to say that there will never be one woman somewhere or a woman somewhere who will try to have more abortions and really would be good for her. But in the same way as we have regulated things like alcohol, right? Everybody doesn't drink. Everybody doesn't like to drink. But in the days of prohibition, there was so much corruption and violence that went with the fact that it was all underground, that the decision was finally made to regulate rather than control and prohibit. And by that regulation and control, we control the harm to society as a whole. And so the issue before us is not so much about what our personal views are about what is right or what is wrong, but our understanding of the role of parliamentarians is that you are there to do what is for the public good, regardless of your personal view. That is what you are there for. So you may or may not like, you may never have an abortion, you may never want anybody to have one. That's your right. Because there are many other choices that women may want to make. That's why we go into counseling and we look at people being told what their options are so that they can discuss it, because it is not an easy decision. Behind this idea that women are just going to misuse it is really a misunderstanding of what a woman faces with pregnancy, what she faces in her life with the decision about pregnancy, and the fact that bringing a child into the world is a life-defining moment for a woman in a way that it never is for a man. And therefore we need to recognize her right to be able to control that, to make a decision about something that is inside of and her body, and to decide whether in fact she is going to carry to term and bring a child into the world, or whether her circumstances do not make that a wise decision. We have to trust women. We have to trust women in the same way that we trust men when we put laws before them. Women are able to make decisions. We are equal citizens. And although we are not equal in the parliament yet, and although it is true that even if we were, not every woman is going to be pro-choice, and not every man is anti-choice. That's the nature of patriarchy. It's a system. It's not people by sex. But the point is that with parliaments skewed the way they are in the world today, except for the happy instances of Rwanda and Chile and a few others, the fact is that the likelihood that our laws historically have come from a perspective where men rather than women have been taken into account is very likely, and I fear it is so in the case of the laws that we presently have. It's an 1861 law that is from colonial times. 1864 law from colonial times, and we think it's time for this parliament to look at what's happening now in Jamaica to women. Yes, it is part of a global move, but the parliament needs to defend women beyond the issue of the history of the privilege that has been the guiding line of the parliamentary process. Thank you.
Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. French. Member Ferguson.
In relation to your position, how does this fit in from the religious perspective?
Okay, our view is that the perspectives, how people feel about it, varies along the religious perspective. We have here a statement from Christians agreeing to the change of the law, right? And this includes 7 reverends, right? So it varies. The point is that the parliament is not being called on to look at personal or religious views. It's being called on to do what is in the public interest, what is good for public policy, what is good for the country, and what will reduce the harm. And what we have shown in the presentation, what Mrs. Maxwell has presented, is clear evidence that changing the law towards liberalization and regulation rather than prohibition, as is currently the dominant focus of the current law, saves women's lives and makes things better for women's health.
There are some presentations that have been graphic in relation to, what it is and what an abortion really is and what takes place. And, I see you have the guideline of 3 months, I think 12 weeks. Yeah, 12 weeks as your... What do you say in relation to these presentations?
The focus of the recommendations of the Advisory Policy Review Committee is on about 12 weeks. However, it does not mean that it is not possible to have abortions outside of that, but it would have to be under very strict guidelines. For example, there is no recommendation for late-term abortions. They are not recommended. Late-term being beyond 22 weeks, because beyond 22 weeks, according to the medical information we have, we actually have a fetus that is viable outside of the womb. So unless, for example, the mother's life was at risk, and it's one or the other, and we can have some very difficult cases. For example, what do you do if you're presented with a mother in late term who has 4 children waiting at home for her care? This is the 5th one, but something in the health profile means that the doctor is faced with either I save the child or the mother. What do you do? These are very practical things that have to be decided. So we are faced with 3 living children who have to be looked after, and one that is not. That's an extremely difficult decision, and that is why this is not recommended and would only be possible in extremely exceptional circumstances.
But Chair, there are persons who are pro-life who are of the view that irrespective of what, whether it is medical reasons, whatever it might be, it ought not to happen.
Yes, and we respect those views because there is nothing in the recommendations that prevents anybody from following their personal, religious, or personal views. Nobody is being told to have an abortion or asked to have an abortion. You are free to choose. This is about choice. And abortion is not the only choice you can make. When we do in the counseling, we recommend that whoever is doing the counseling helps the person to see what are the different options available. But if in the final analysis a woman, an adult woman decides that, or a woman faced with that, decides that she, of all those options, the one that is best for her in her particular circumstances is abortion, then that should be respected.
Just to add as well to that we have to recognize the issue of choice. It is a matter of giving women choices. So it's presenting the situation to women and giving them the range of choices and allowing them, as Joan has said, to make an informed decision based on the choices available to her.
If I may, I just have one question. You mentioned the counseling session, and I also agree that counseling should be a part of this. Would you also recommend during that time when you're asking the woman to make a decision to possibly include some sort of a video to show maybe the procedure or just to show a video of what takes place? How do you feel about that?
We have not really considered that, but I can react to what Member Ferguson said about the videos that have been showed in this Parliament, because I have been present at all the hearings. And honestly, the level of distortion is mind-boggling. I have been in here and had to watch so-called abortions with pieces of fetuses flying all over the place. Nothing like that happens, right? And also, it is clear that for the purpose of the argument from that side, there has been a focus on late-term abortions. And we are not recommending late-term abortions. We are saying a late-term abortion would be something you would really have to have a very exceptional circumstance to take on board. If before the 22 weeks, you can have the access, but also you need to have the agreement of not just one doctor, but two. So there are all these provisions to take on board, because we are not insensitive to the fact that this is an emotional issue. But we are trying to take on board the concerns of the opposition to say, well, yes, so we are being careful about what is being proposed and taking some of this on board. But our line is that the viable fetus is 23 weeks. And that's when we have a really, really super problem that would have to be, no, we're not recommending it. But if there's some extreme circumstance, then it is up for the medical profession to decide. We have to also remember that there's an impact on our medical profession, because now doctors, incidentally, you know that a middle-class woman who has enough money in her pocket can always find a doctor who will do an abortion in Jamaica today. That's the reality. The women who are not being able to access those services or have not been are poor women, single women, unemployed women, right, who then have to go underground to get these unsafe abortions. Now, doctors who even used to help the middle-class women are now reluctant to do that, because the acts of the law, there's so much hanging over their heads, makes it very difficult for even a medical practitioner to make a reasoned decision presented with a case before him or her. So it really complicates matters, and we just need to make things a lot more simple and to facilitate women in something that they have voted for with their lives over centuries. They have not had the vote in Parliament to do it, but they have voted with their lives, and their bodies have suffered from the fact that parliaments have not actually affirmed their needs and their health and their rights.
Chairman, for those medical doctors, and I'm playing devil's advocate, for those medical doctors who would have performed or who are performing abortion now, is it a legal act?
No, it's not.
It is illegal. It is clearly illegal.
I just
Clearly illegal, and depending on how the conversation in the society goes, because if you're not paying attention to it, nobody worries so much. But now that the abortion debate is in high level, and some doctors have actually been taken to court, right? So it's becoming a limiting factor on the medical profession, even making their own informed proposals or suggestions to a patient.
But even the illegality of it makes people not want to perform it, because doctors are afraid of what is going to happen.
And should be.
And should be.
And
let
based
us,
on the law.
Yeah, and let us also remember that when women go underground and seek out services which are illegal, they then come to the public health system. And then the public health system is the one that then suffers, because we have to now try and find a solution to what is happening to them. So that also needs to be taken into account.
Can I just offer some evidence from the Barbados case? I don't have the publication here, but it's a social and economic journal, where it shows that in Barbados, the rate of teenage pregnancy fell from 20% of live births to 14% of live births since the law was changed. And not only that, the amazing thing was that although Barbados did the training and so on for their health system, their Ministry of Health costs went down, because they were no longer dealing with that level of complications of abortion that we are now dealing with at Victoria Jubilee Hospital. So on every side, there's something to be gained, from the health side, from the government expenditure side, and centrally in terms of women now being able to be safe in an area that they have a demand for.
So let me ask, the question of morality, where is that in all this?
In the individual level, every single person has their own right to exercise their own individual morality in relation to this. Nobody has to have an abortion in the same way that nobody has to drink alcohol. I don't drink alcohol, right? But the point is that there's a law that says those who want it can have it, and it saves us from the corruption and the violence that used to go with it. So nothing here prevents people making their own personal choices, whether according to their religion or their personal morality. But morality is not the same for everyone. The attitude to this is not the same for everyone. So we do the thing that gives the largest number of rights to everyone, because this does not limit the rights of those who would not wish to go that route.
Another little thing, Chairman, relative to in the pro-choice, the arguments that come from, what about the fathers? While we're talking about women health.
Well, certainly a woman can consult with anyone she wishes to. She can consult with her pastor, with her friend, with her mother. She is free to consult with anyone. But in the end, the choice must be hers. She is the one that has to carry that pregnancy. So she is free to consult with anyone she chooses, but the choice remains hers.
I want to thank Mrs. French and Mrs. Maxwell for their passionate presentation. No, please don't chair in the gallery there. Thank you, ladies. We're now going to be moving to our second persons. We have Miss Hilton and Miss Shields from the I'm Glad I'm a Girl Foundation. You don't know who will go first? You'll decide. Oh. Yes. We're going to be withdrawing that. Mr. Romain Scott. So you'll come after Mr. Romain Scott. Thank you.
Afternoon. Before I start, I would like to distribute some notes so that you may follow my presentation. This is for the committee members. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I just note before Mr. Romain's presentation that I have shared with the clerk or secretary, I'm not sure what the terminology is, but I have shared for the entry into the record the actual report of the Abortion Review Advisory Group, and I have extracted the recommendations in a 2-page document which will make it easy to read for those parliamentarians who are interested in the issue. Thank you.
So, afternoon again. I am Romain Scott. I'm coming from Montego Bay. I'm going to start my presentation now regarding private members' motion number 61 of 2018. There are 5 sins that scream to heaven for vengeance. A, the blood of Abel. B, the sin of Sodom. C, the cry of the oppressed in Egypt. 4, the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan. And 5, the injustice to the wage earner. Now, another committee in this House has been addressing the injustice to the wage earner in the case of the security guards. I am here today to address, number 1. That is the blood of Abel. Genesis 4, 8-10 says, Then Cain said to his brother Abel, Let's go out in the fields. And when they were out in the fields, Cain turned on his brother and killed him. The Lord asked Cain, Where is your brother Abel? He answered, I don't know. Am I supposed to take care of my brother? Then the Lord said, Why have you done this terrible thing? Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, like a voice calling for revenge. All the unborn who face direct abortion are like unto Abel. What do you mean by this term, direct abortion? Let's start with moderate pictures. What do you mean by direct abortion? Direct abortion is the deliberate killing of an unborn child, or the intentional delivery before viability, anywhere from conception onwards. There is such a thing as indirect abortion, such as those that are spontaneous, where there is no human interference, or those that happen because of accidents, happenstance. Niccolo Machiavelli, in his book The Prince, describes a leader who employed ends justifying the means. I hope you have my presentation that was submitted. Look at the principle of plenitude, which is on page 14 of the presentation, which tells that any act, page 14, the pages are numbered. Page 14, the principle of plenitude. Any act has 3 constituents, and that is the means, the intention, and the circumstance. In the case of abortion, the intention is to meet the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations. The alleged circumstance is the high maternal mortality ratio, but abortion is 8th, way behind the number 1 killer, which is eclampsia, or gestational hypertension. So we're not even sure about the circumstance. We say that the intention is good, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And what is the act that we are trying to do? The act requires the means of legalizing direct abortion. And direct abortion is never, ever right. My 4th point, rape and incest. Now that's on pages 19 to 20 of my electronic submission. I hope you're finding it. No, not the PowerPoint. I made 2 submissions. I made a written submission and one full of pictures. It's the written one I'm referring to. Okay, so I'm at number 4 on the notes that I had circulated a while ago. It's rape and incest, and it's on page 19 and 20 of my submission. Rape and incest. 2 wrongs do not make a right. Just as how rape and incest are always wrong, so it is with direct abortion. You know, some people would say, oh, well, she dressed seductively, therefore she asked for it. They're trying to reason rape as a right, as something correct. Just as how ridiculous as that sounds, it is equally ridiculous to attempt to justify abortion. Right after a rape, a woman must have a rape kit done to catch the perpetrator, and spermicide and ovulating inhibited contraceptives administered. I put this caveat: no anti-implantation methods be used, because as science, and this is not, I mean, we could go into religion, but science, and we're talking about the Nobel Committee for Physiology or Medicine from 1991 had said in the address to the laureates that year that at the moment of conception is when the ion channels activate and you have scientifically human life. That is science. They teach it in all the biology books. That's when human life starts. When chromosomes add up, 23 from the male sperm, 23 from the female to give 46, and 47 in the case of Down syndrome. Now, I mentioned no anti-implantation methods because there are some pills on the market like Postinor 2 that goes beyond contraception and blocks implantation. Science says that human life starts when sperm meets egg, and that's conception. Adoption is the only option if a mother does not want the child she is pregnant with due to a rape. Stiffer, non-lethal penalties are needed for rapists, and once they are caught and engaged in hard labor, perhaps the government should pay for the education of the child. Both yes, ma'am. The last statement? Yes, I'm saying stiffer, non-lethal penalties are needed for rapists, and once they are brought to books and engaged in hard labor, the government should consider paying for the education of the child that was produced via the rape. Yes, I believe the government. Once the rapist has been caught and put to work, once the rapist has been caught and put to work.
Who would have been raped would have been one who is vulnerable relative to economics. Are you saying that why would the government take that responsibility if it was, say, an upper class person who was raped? I just want to find your justification as to why government would take on that responsibility.
Well, because usually whether upper class or not, sometimes the woman doesn't want the child. The woman doesn't want the child, and then you're talking about state care or other circumstances that might not be favorable. So to them saying, once the perpetrator is caught, perhaps the government, and is working, perhaps the government could fund the education for that child.
Right. Mr. Stewart, before you go on, do you have any data on the number of persons who are caught, rapists who are caught, to justify your argument there?
The argument is born out of some women that is not wanting to keep the child. So they keep the pregnancy, the child is born, now what? I mean, and after the perpetrator has been caught. So that's what I'm looking at. After the 9 months, who is going to educate that child? Mother doesn't want him, rapist is in prison, what's next?
So what if the person is not caught? How does one deal with that?
And that's why I put that in. It would, in my mind, it might encourage people coming forward. Right. Number 5. Pro both lives means I am pro both lives, and it means in support of both mother and child equally. Some people argue for egalitarian society. Well, so am I. Both mother and child equally. Until the philosophy that holds the already born superior and the yet to be born inferior is finally discredited and abandoned. Everywhere is war. War in the womb, war uptown, war downtown, war. Number 6, ectopic pregnancy, which is on page 16 of my presentation, my email, my worded presentation, page 16. Ectopic pregnancy. This is a pregnancy that takes place in the fallopian tube instead of in the uterus. Now, in 1915 and 1917, there were the first successful transplantation of ectopic pregnancies into the uterus. And this was not done again successfully until 1980. In 1987, the use of methotrexate to abort the ectopic pregnancy started to become popular. And this is direct abortion. It should not be allowed. Partial or full salpingectomy is licit to resolve the ectopic pregnancy at the 11th hour. So I know full well the ectopic pregnancy, you're looking at it, a child is unlikely to properly develop in that narrow tube. Am I recommending that a woman who has an ectopic pregnancy sit down there with it until her fallopian tube ruptures? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. We have a principle which is in bullet number 7 called the principle of the double effect, whereby if an 11th hour, that's a Hail Mary, if an 11th hour, it's on page 16 to 17, if an 11th hour initiative is taken on to save a woman's life that does not have a direct abortion involved, then it is licit. So, an example, if a doctor treats a woman's high blood pressure by aborting her child, he has committed a direct abortion. He is guilty of killing the child in order to treat the condition of the mother. And that's not egalitarian, that's mommy over baby. The pro-both life position is mommy and baby are equal. Daddy and baby are equal. All the people who are walking on 2 feet and born already and the unborn are equals. We were all coming from there. Who is it that speaks for the unborn? A true example of the principle of the double effect would be this. If a doctor has to perform a hysterectomy in order to remove a cancerous uterus, he's focusing on the organ itself in an attempt to heal the mother. If the mother is pregnant at the time, this is an indirect abortion, which is different from a direct abortion. Direct abortion, you go for the child. You go for the child. In the indirect abortion I just described, the doctor went for the uterus. The child happens to be in the uterus. Now, I want you to understand that this is 11th hour. You're going to try and wait it out as long as possible for the benefit of the child. But if the woman is so sick and you've got to move, you've got to start the chemotherapy, or you've got to have the hysterectomy, or you've got to have radiation therapy, and in so doing, the minute you start, the child is delivered and the child dies. That is not a direct abortion. There's a difference. Okay. Indirect abortion, because you're not planning it, you don't intend it, and you don't go after the child. Because the child has an inalienable right, just like mommy, to life. Okay, so the next I have to is number 7. I wish to speak about eclampsia. And why eclampsia? Because eclampsia is the number 1. Yeah, I have a slide. Let me flick to it. Oh. I'm slided out. Can I be re-slided? Eclampsia is Jamaica's #1 problem. It's a monster. And I'm very grateful for the high dependency units for premature babies at Bustamante, Victoria, Jubilee, and Cornwall Regional. It was in the paper last year, and therefore premature babies. Now, sometimes if the convulsions are so bad, and they are not here yet? Oh, well,
Chairman, under the PROMAC program, that there are high dependency units that would be done in these hospitals, but I'm not sure that those high dependency units have started and complete. No, I'm saying that under the PROMAC project, an announcement was made that there would be high dependency units in some of our critical hospitals. As to whether those high dependency units are completed, I have not seen anything to confirm that. I know it is supposed to be done. In fact, I think it should have had 5, 6 high dependency units for newborn and 5 for maternal. But as to whether those have been
2008 means this statistic did not change. It said that 56.8% of women interviewed between the ages of 15 years and 49 years had never seen a gynecologist. And that must be a factor in the reason why eclampsia is so difficult for us to manage here in Jamaica. The women are supposed to see a gynecologist, reproductive women, once a year. And some of the women in the statin survey or report, some of them reach 49, and have never seen a gynecologist. Okay. I'm now turn over the paper, the notes, the single sheet. Number 8, things distant from #1 cannot be called leading. And that's on page 12 of my worded submission. And this is an important point. I heard Afet McCobbins mentioned. I'm using her 1993-1995 study. You may say, why so old? Well, I've also included on the sheet study by Dr. Andreen Harris, which she presented recently. And the placing of abortion in 1993 to 95 is 8th. I would say 8th lagging. They like to say 8th leading, but I know, well, Ms. Cuthbert knows, you can't run a race come 8th and proclaim that you're leading. Abortion is way back at number 8, behind 51 eclampsia deaths, 25 hemorrhage, and that's 25 women who died because of it, 18 thromboembolism, etc. In the triennium from 2016 to 2018, Dr. Andreen Harris is reporting that direct abortions come 9th. And it's a bit odd, and that's why I have mentioned in my presentation eclampsia. I said we should be talking about the #1 cause. Now, what does this for? Abortion comes in as 4. Direct abortion contributes 4 maternal deaths over 3 years. So that's basically 1 a year. The goodly doctor down at Victoria Jubilee, also, his name will soon come up, also said that it's 1 death per year. Now, don't get me wrong. You say 1 death is too many, but when you count 1, or when some people count 1, I count 2. Remember, it's mommy and baby. And usually the baby dies first, and then one mummy per year, right? Okay, so I move on. So I don't know, there's an approach of Chicken Little, the sky is falling, we've got to address this abortion. I said, what about the eclampsia? What about the hemorrhage? What has been done about that? What has been done about the majority of women in Jamaica never seeing a gynecologist? Number 9, high prevalence or low. Of the 7,168 women interviewed for the Reproductive Health Survey 2002, only 102 admitted to ever having at least one abortion. This gives a rate of 1.42%. And the authors of the Reproductive Health Survey had to admit that that rate is mighty low. And it is less than half the WHO 22,000 per year. And then I'm yet to find out how WHO comes up with that estimate. But who are you going to believe? Statin or WHO? Number 10. Unreliable 2016 public opinion survey. That is on page 4 of my presentation. This is, I believe, one of the statistics put in the news by Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, but I will show. Right, here it is. Look at those two bar graphs. Don't they look the same? Would you imagine? The same people answered 2 different questions, but the pollster used the term terminate pregnancy in one question and abortion in the other. My theory is that the people recognized the word abortion and said no. And then some people did not recognize the word terminate and said yes. Some people are under the illusion that the first language of Jamaican is the Queen's English. You know, the Jamaican for abortion is dash rebelli. One wonders if they had put that, but you see, they say that now that's going to be too emotive. But there you have to strike a balance between what the people know and can answer to and what is too emotive. So this was presented by Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn. Well, she presented the blue. She did not, I don't recall her presenting the red. But I went and read the Hope Institute survey that was done back when Dr. Winant Patterson, now deceased, was in charge of APRAG, Abortion Policy Review Advisory Group. So this is not evidence to go forward. This means that the polling exercise for those 2 questions is invalid. It's unreliable. We can't deduce anything from that. That's unscientific. Okay.
So Stuart, I'm going to ask you to wrap up now. We have 4 other presenters.
All right. I will also say it is the poor, also described in Hope Institute, it's the poor that say no to abortion the most. Don't you see in this graph here? Southern Eastern Regional Health Authority has the lowest level, the lowest no, and the purple, which is the west, is greatest. Next, where is it? This one, yes. Hope Enterprises 2006. Women should not be legally allowed to access abortions. This is the upper working class that says the softest not, and it is the lower class that says the loudest not. And this is the same data and document being advertised by Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn. I'm using it against the pro-abortionist. I'm using it against the Prague. Their own data, their own document says the poor are the ones saying no the loudest to abortion. In summary, I'd like also to mention the maternal mortality ratio for Jamaica is the lowest in the Caribbean. It is the lowest in the Caribbean. There is a graph here that demonstrates it. Of course, Guyana has the highest. There's Guyana, the orange. Guyana is the orange and Jamaica is right next to it. We are lower than Barbados, and Barbados legalized abortion in 1983. In 1983, Barbados legalized abortion. How come Jamaica is lower in maternal mortality ratio than Barbados? Barbados' name come up so many times. In summary, the blood of Abel is the blood of the directly aborted unborn. Direct abortion is always wrong. Rape victims must hasten to get a rape kit done and have spermicide and contraception administered. No anti-implantation measures must be used as human life starts at conception. Pro both lives means treating the already born and the unborn as equals. Ectopic pregnancies can be resolved without direct abortion. Women in their reproductive years need to see their gynecologist at least once a year. Applause for the high dependency units. Hopefully that will come. Direct abortion is still coming next to last in the causes of maternal death. The direct abortion rate is low, 1.42%. Statistics presented by pro-abortionists are unreliable and conflicting. The poor has given the loudest no to direct abortion. Why fight for a right and then not use it? Which is what Bill Johnson had to admit in his poll. In closing, I'd like to say, final sentence, since the 1st century, some people are saying they're tired of fighting this. It came up in the 70s, it came up in the early 2000s, and now it's back us again. The church has been fighting this from the 1st century, and we are not tired. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Stewart. Members, any questions or comments? Yes, Dr. Ferguson.
I would want to thank Mr. Stewart for his presentation. Some of the, I would say, much research has been done as to how he has interpreted the research, Mr. Chairman, is another matter. I understand this position, and I do believe that on both sides there is emotion in the positions, but there is some areas that I also find, I get the impression that it is more opinion rather than built on research in spite of what has been done. Where you say, Mr. Stewart, under ectopic pregnancy and uterine cancer, unborn child never threatens the life of the mother. What exactly do you mean by that? And following that, you said circumstances that may threaten a woman's life during pregnancy are very rare. Is that supported by your research, or is that your view?
For the first question, where you say the unborn does not threaten the child, where you say, I say the unborn, yes? And what page are you on? Yes, the unborn child never threatens the life of the mother. The unborn child is never an aggressor. It's an aggressor that threatens. I don't see how an unborn child can be categorized as an aggressor, which is what I would have to do in order to say that the child is a threat. The child is never an aggressor.
Just to follow up on what Dr. Ferguson, Member Ferguson has said, are you aware that an ectopic pregnancy is a tubal pregnancy that is not going to be viable and the woman's life, that women die from ectopic pregnancy every year, and that a baby cannot survive in the tube? Therefore, either the mother is going to die and the fetus will never live once it's in the tube. It's a tubal pregnancy. A tubal pregnancy is never viable. However, the mother's life, a tubal pregnancy, let me repeat, is never viable, cannot be viable. But it's the woman's life. There's only one person's life then that would be in danger, and that is the woman that is pregnant, because an ectopic pregnancy is not a viable pregnancy. She cannot bring that child to term. Are you aware of that? That they would have to perform some sort of a surgery to either take out the tube and the woman can still be left with an ovary, or they can do the whole thing if she's still within a particular age group where she wants to continue to have children. Are you aware of what you're saying?
In 1915, I remember saying this, in 1915 and in 1917 were the first time a surgical procedure to take the ectopic pregnancy and transfer it to the uterus. That was done. This is not to say that, oh, it's an ectopic pregnancy, all is lost, the child is going to die and there's no hope. No, no. That procedure was also repeated in 1980 successfully. However, the medical profession has not been gravitating towards it. In light of...
Are you saying that the medical profession then have been careless in what they've been doing, and instead of trying to save a child that the mother would want, that the doctors are not trying to save a fetus that's in the tube? Is that what you're saying?
Let me answer. My answer is in context of my interpretation of what you said. Tubal pregnancy is basically a waste of time. That's what I gathered from it. It's hopeless. That's what I gathered.
Those are your words.
But
those are not my words. I'm asking you about the medical profession.
No, I said my interpretation of what you said is that.
Saying that is not what I'm saying.
But
so
what
that's
are you saying?
Your interpretation, but it's not what I said.
So that's why I'm presenting this alternative that is not hopeless. Now, in the terms of the medical community, other doctors have said that doctors need to be sensitized more about the surgery that was pioneered in 1915 and 1917. We need to make it more popular so that people don't think an ectopic pregnancy is a hopeless case. It is not.
Thank you, Mrs. Stewart. Thank you, members. If there are no other questions or concerns, we will move to our third presentation, and we're mindful of the time. Ms. Claudia Williams, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, thank you. Okay. I'm about to talk about abortion and our constitutional freedoms in Jamaica. We all have an understanding of what abortion is. It is the termination of a pregnancy before the pregnancy can be brought to term. An abortion can occur involuntarily in the form of a miscarriage, where the body essentially rejects the embryo or the fetus, or it can be voluntary, where steps are taken to intervene in the pregnancy and with the intention of ending the pregnancy. When it is allowed by law, abortion is one of the safest medical procedures available today. Data collected from the CDC in the United States shows that the mortality rate of pregnancy, of bringing a pregnancy to term, is about 17.2 out of every 100,000 live births, versus a mortality rate of 0.7 out of every 100,000 abortion procedures. Essentially, and this is factual, a pregnancy is a risk to a woman's life. Back in the day, before modern medicine, when women got pregnant, they used to write their wills, because being pregnant meant that you were likely to die. Abortion has a long history. It dates all the way back to 2700 BC. Back in those days, and in societies where women do not have free access to abortion, abortion is facilitated through the consumption of certain herbs, through aggressive massage to the abdomen, through trauma to the abdomen, through use of sharp implements to induce miscarriage. The abortion debate has been a long and painful one for women. It is one that, as our previous presenters have stated, that women have voted for these rights with their lives. There are numerous arguments that have been presented from the position of religious perspectives, philosophical perspectives, moral, biological, legal arguments have been made in this debate. Some of the arguments that have been presented against abortion include the proposition that a human fetus is equivalent to a human person with a right to live, and thereby an abortion is essentially tantamount to murder. My position on this is, if an embryo or fetus is alive, then what is cancer? An embryo is a ball of cells, so is cancer. A fetus is a ball of cells that has taken shape, so is stage 2 cancer. You say an embryo is a potential life. Well, if we allowed cancer to go on, what could it become? Another argument is that there could be abuse of abortion in terms of sex selection, genetic selection. This is something that has occurred in other jurisdictions, such as China, such as India, where boys are valued more highly than girls. And so abortion was used to ensure that you produced the gender child that you wanted to produce. Another argument that is presented is that it is against the will of God, and my question would be, who's God? And who is God, and why is it important to me? We all know the dangers of invoking deity, God, or religion when it concerns matters of human rights or general social advancement. If we were to always invoke God when it comes to matters such as this, we would still be slaves and we'd still be in medieval times. We would not have any technology more advanced than a horse and a carriage. Some personal arguments have been presented, such as there are some women who cannot have children, so therefore those of us who can should not be having abortions. And I would say I'm really good at science, but does that mean that I have to be a doctor? If I'm a better runner than Usain Bolt, am I obligated to be an athlete? And does the government have a right to mandate me? Another argument is that the decision should not lie solely with the woman, which is somewhat of a reasonable argument, but when a man forces a woman to have a child, he can then abandon that decision. The woman does not have the same choice. Not only that, but the woman carries all the risk of a pregnancy, and as we have already stated, every pregnancy is a risk to a woman's life. There are many reasons why women choose to have abortions. Self-determination, she may want to delay childbearing in order to allow herself time to achieve her personal or career goals. She may not have the financial support to take care of the child because maybe the man abandoned her. The child may have come about because of sexual assault, and bringing that child to term could be such a traumatic event for that woman that she could be a danger to herself and to that child. Health, some pregnancies are a real risk to a woman's life. She may have cancer, there may be ectopic pregnancies, as we've spoken about before, and in order to save the woman's life, there has to be removal of the fetus in order to save her life. There may be issues with the health of the fetus. The health of the fetus may be sufficiently compromised that if it is brought to term, life expectancy would be short or very poor. The woman may not feel that she's suitable for parenthood at this stage in her life or ever. There may be cultural or societal pressures. There are certain societies where getting pregnant out of wedlock would get you a sentence of death, and so women may elect to have abortions. As well as there may be some legal requirements, such as in China with the one-child policy. If you already had a child and you thereafter got pregnant, you would have had to have an abortion. So arguments on both sides can be emotional and highly personal and religious. None of these considerations are important for the enactment of law. What we should consider is what rights are guaranteed under our Constitution and how best do we ensure that those rights are protected, and what decision is best for the prosperity of our nation and for our people. Our Charter of Rights and Freedom guarantees the following for all Jamaicans: the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right to not be deprived thereof. The right to freedom of thought, conscience, belief, and observance of political doctrines, the right to freedom of expression, right to freedom of the person, right to freedom of religion. Furthermore, it states that the state has an obligation to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights and freedoms. Additionally, Parliament shall pass no law and no organ of the state shall take any action which abrogates, abridges, or infringes on these basic rights. Our Charter of Rights is adopted from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and International Rights Law as established by the United Nations. It puts us on par with countries such as Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, United States, and New Zealand that have similar rights guaranteed in their constitutions. In fact, Canada and the UK have basically the exact same Charter of Rights as Jamaica. Despite our constitution, Jamaica has maintained on its books a law called the Offences Against a Persons Act. Section 72 and 73 of that act makes it illegal or unlawful for a woman to procure an abortion and for anyone to assist her in the procurement of said abortion. This law provides no basis or justification for why this act has been deemed unlawful. Upon further research, you realize that the Offences Against the Persons Act in Jamaica is identical to the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861 in England and Wales. Sections 58 and 59 of that act are identical to sections 72 and 73 of our act. So essentially, we have adopted a colonial law, and then our society has progressed and we've done nothing about it. By having this law in our books, Jamaica joins over 122 countries where abortion is illegal in varying degrees. So we're going to take a look now at how other jurisdictions with similar Charter of Rights have treated with abortion and what can we learn from them. So Canada, abortion was legal in Canada. It was made illegal in Canada in 1869. However, this law was reviewed in 1969 because of the high level of deaths among women who procured illegal abortion. The law was amended in 1969 to allow abortion in limited circumstances. However, that law was again challenged by Dr. Henry Morgenthaler, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, and it was taken to the Supreme Court, where it was ruled that the existing laws restricting abortion were unconstitutional. The court noted that forcing a woman by threat of criminal sanction to carry a fetus to term unless she meets certain criteria unrelated to her own priorities and aspirations, and that the law asserts that the woman's capacity to reproduce is to be subject not to her own control, but to that of the state, were essentially a breach of the woman's right to security of the person, which is guaranteed under Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which, if you recall, is also guaranteed under Jamaica's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So essentially, they ruled that trying to put a woman in prison for having an abortion is against the Constitution. Concerning when challenged about the rights of the fetus, the court determined that while the state has an interest in protecting the fetus at some point, this interest cannot override that of a pregnant woman, because the right to security of the person of a pregnant woman was infringed on more than was required to achieve the objective of protecting the fetus, and the means were not reasonable. The courts were again, or the law was again challenged regarding a woman's responsibility to a fetus. And the court ruled that the court cannot impose a duty of care on a pregnant woman towards her fetus, as it would interfere with her ability to exercise her own autonomy rights during pregnancy. So essentially what they're saying is, if a woman is presented with a situation that endangers both her life and her fetus's life, the court cannot mandate that she should protect the life of the fetus over her own life. Concerning whether or not the fetus is a person, the court relied on the born alive rule inherited from English common law, and we like to adopt English common law in Jamaica, to determine that the fetus was not a person. In the United States, Roe versus Wade decriminalized abortion nationwide in 1973. In deciding Roe versus Wade, the court ruled that limiting abortion was essentially unconstitutional. Concerning whether life begins at conception, the court states that we need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins. Instead, it chose to point out that historically, under English and American common law and statutes, the unborn have never been recognized as persons in the whole sense, and thus fetuses are not legally entitled to the protection afforded by the right to life, specifically enumerated in the 14th Amendment. South Korea, just this year in April 2019, the abortion ban was lifted in South Korea. The court ruled that the abortion ban limits women's rights to pursue their own destinies and violates their rights to health by limiting their access to safe and timely procedures. Furthermore, embryos depend entirely on a mother's body for their survival and development, so it cannot be concluded that they are separate, independent living beings entitled to the right to life. Singapore is a country that Jamaica admires greatly. Abortion has never been illegal in Singapore. However, in 1970, Singapore took steps to formally make abortion legal. The Abortion Act of 1969 was instituted to protect women against the dangers of illegal abortions. Abortion is available to any woman who wants it in Singapore. I'm just gonna skip some facts here. Just some data. Data shows that between 1990 and 2014, the rates of abortion have declined significantly in developed countries, but have not declined as significantly in developing countries. The next slide shows that abortion rates have declined in the developed world from about 46 for every 1,000 women to 27 for every 1,000 women. However, in Latin America and the Caribbean, abortion rates have actually increased from 40 in every 1,000 women to 44 in every 1,000 women, making it one of the highest rates of abortion in the world. So, the effects of making abortion illegal. What we know is that highly restrictive laws do not reduce or eliminate abortions. Enforcing outdated laws regarding abortion does not benefit the larger society. And what is happening now in Central America is that women are actually being sent to prison because it is perceived that they have had abortion, even if they've just had natural miscarriages. And is that what we want to be as a country? Because what that does is that robs children of their mothers, and society does not benefit from the economic and social contributions of those women. Lack of access to safe abortions put women's lives at risk because whether it's legal or not, women will still pursue them. These situations will now become costly to the state. Women develop infections, you have children without mothers, you have children who are not wanted, you have a situation of disorder and crime in the society because these children are born into abject poverty and furthermore they are not wanted. Evidence shows that women who seek and are not granted abortion often develop mental health issues in later years. So what is the responsibility of the government? I said the first responsibility is that the government must know that it does not exist to adjudicate on morality. The government exists to protect the basic freedoms of all Jamaicans under the Constitution. They are supposed to respect and honor women's constitutional rights to self-determination. The government should reduce women's need to choose abortion by increasing their educational and economic opportunities. If you educate a woman, you educate a nation. Right? The government must remember that it is not their role to deal in or protect sanctity, or worse, to make any laws that give consideration to sanctity as determined by any religion. The government must observe that the beliefs of the church or any other religious bodies are not objective truths and that the church does not represent the beliefs of all Jamaicans. And by objective truths, I mean those beliefs are not substantiated by any tangible facts. So the church may tout the Bible as a book of facts, a book that they follow, but the Bible is not a book of facts. The Bible is a book of stories that people believe to be true, and that is a fact. Fetuses have no constitutional rights under Jamaican law because they are not recognized as people. Furthermore, just because something is practiced or believed does not make it right for the country. In Africa, women have for centuries been subject to female genital mutilation because groups of people believed spiritually and religiously that this was the right thing to do. And when women died from these procedures, they were seen as evil and as witches. In Tanzania, to this day, twins are seen as a bad omen. It is a bad thing to have twins. And these children are abandoned by their mothers because of those beliefs in that country. So are we going to continue to make women suffer in Jamaica because of religious beliefs or personal truths? If women are granted access to abortion, safe access to abortion, then we can expect to see reduced number of deaths and injuries that that result from unsafe abortions, reduced number of unwanted children that are left on a burden on the state, reduced cost in abortion, which would make it more accessible to more women on the economic spectrum, greater access to educational and economic freedoms for women, because if they are not encumbered by having to bring pregnancies to term, they can spend more time in school, they can spend more time pursuing their career goals. You'll have better cared for and adjusted children with greater access to education, because I don't think anyone can dispute that when women are prepared and ready and financially ready for a child, emotionally ready for a child, those children are much better adjusted than those children that are born into poverty and unwanted. And if we have more children that are born into better situations, then we can have a rise in the level of education and productivity in the country. We can improve our culture of crime and violence. We can essentially end the cycle of poverty if we give women freedom over their own fertility. So we have to decide as a country, do we want to continue to be poor? Do we want to continue to be in a country that is full of crime and disorder? Do we want to continue to see our children on the streets, begging, working, living? Do we want to continue to see a proliferation of shanty towns and ghettos that are prime breeding grounds for crime and violence? Or do we want the prosperity that was promised to us? Do we want to see our people live in organized communities? Do we want to see our children in school succeeding and becoming innovators and leaders in the world? That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. But before we move on to our next presenter, if there are any concerns or questions, you posited that the Bible is a book of stories that were made up.
Yes.
How do you respond to that and society's views on this?
Society is entitled to their view, and that's why I say it's a personal truth. So people believe that to be true, but it's not substantiated by any fact. So you believe that the Bible is true. You believe that God is real, but nobody can prove it. They just believe it to be true based on their personal experiences. And you cannot use personal experiences to enact a law that affect other people who don't share those experiences or those beliefs.
I hear you, but I am still positing that majority of us Jamaicans or Jamaican civil society do believe and respect our tradition as relates to the Bible.
And my argument is that that is irrelevant to enacting law, because it doesn't matter how many Jamaicans are religious or Christian. The responsibility of the government is to do what is best for all Jamaicans and to respect the beliefs of all Jamaicans. Now, making abortion legal doesn't hurt anything but pride. But having abortion continue to be illegal hurts people in a very real way. People actually die.
Thank you. The debate will continue. Questions, members? Concerns?
Ms. Williams, I'd like to congratulate you on a well-researched presentation also. But I would like to ask, I think in your presentation, you said that Canada, UK has the same...
Very similar. Charter of Rights. Yeah.
As it relates to freedom.
Freedom of security, freedom of conscience, thought, belief, freedom of expression, freedom of religion.
And based on the Supreme Court judgment in Canada, why therefore has the pro-choice groups not tested this in the courts in relation to the abortion? Because there was a ruling in Canada as it relates to, you made mention in your presentation, I just want to make sure, it was Morgan Taylor?
Yes.
And you said the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in R versus Morgan Taylor that the existing laws restricting abortion were unconstitutional.
Yes.
And I'm saying if it were that it was tested in the courts and proved to be unconstitutional, then it would also, in a way, protect whatever amendments are made in this House going forward, that you would not, by virtue of governments or leaders, would have been able to change or amend, as they see it, if it were that in truth and in fact the court would have ruled about the unconstitutionality of it. So I'm just putting that on the table, whether there has been any consideration as it relates to yourself or your group or any of the other groups, pro-choice groups that have come before this parliament.
I'm not sure I understand the question. The courts ruled in favor of abortion.
Right. And I'm saying now that in the case of Jamaica, that has a similar freedom
Right.
as Canada, why wouldn't you not test it in the courts, even as we are pursuing it in the parliament?
Oh, that's why I'm here. So that's why I'm presenting that argument, that that should be the basis of our consideration.
Well, that's what I am asking, because I'm just seeing if that were to happen, then in the same way, then you would, I think certainly that would be the way to go.
Yes, I agree.
Yes, Mrs. Maxwell? Mrs.
Yeah.
French?
Yeah, I would like to thank Ms. Williams very much for that presentation. I think it was very sharp and very clear. There is, however, one aspect of it that I don't know if I'm entitled to ask a question, but I'm trying to get clarification, right? The Select Committee in Jamaica, which was set up in 2008-9, which sat, was abandoned without any notice to those of us who participated in the hearings. And the discussions then moved to an arena where those of us who were pro-choice activists were not looking, which was the parallel discussions going on about the Charter of Rights. And I would like to ask Ms. Williams and others interested to clarify this for me, because my understanding is that that abandonment of the Select Committee was followed by moves within the Parliament to put a savings clause on the existing law. Now, I am not a lawyer, but I've checked the legal profession, and it would appear to me that that makes it harder to change the law. And it is also, in my personal view, not respectful of the processes of consultation with civil society and others over a law, because we were never even notified that that process was going to be stopped. So I need some clarification about what the law is now as compared, for example, with what is the situation in Canada, because although we may have had these constitutional rights, I am not clear as to whether the movement in the Charter of Rights that happened did not in fact put a savings clause on the existing law. And that to me would be what is it we call it? A travesty, you know, it's a travesty of the consultative process that we need to address. How did that happen? Why did that happen? Did it really happen? But I'm legally advised that it did happen, and I do not know what that would mean Member of Parliament Ferguson, for this thing of challenging the matter in the courts of law. That's why we have come back to this Parliament, because it is the Parliament that is now able to fix whatever needs fixing and to do whatever needs to be done to ensure that the turning back of the process of legal reform, which happened in 2008, 2009, can now be rectified. Thank you.
Ferguson, yes.
That we could do that research. I certainly am not sure what might have happened at that time, but we could pursue the research. And in my positing about testing in the courts, it would not be that I am saying we ought not to pursue the present course. And the Parliament is regarded as the highest court of the land. However, the point I was trying to make is that if it is that you were to pursue and that the action would have been unconstitutional, then you would not have tampering with any amendment that would come now at any future period if it were seen as being unconstitutional. So that's why I was just putting that on the table.
And just to add, Mrs. French, that Hansard would have the recordings, and that could be looked at. The clerk could find.
We just made a note to check it. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Member.
I just wanted to say a great presentation. I congratulate you on that wonderful presentation. I only have one question to ask. You mentioned about being raped, and how do you feel about, even after listening to at least one of the presentation, that unwanted pregnancy, especially if a woman is raped and has a child, because she should not have an abortion, she shouldn't have that choice as a woman being brutally raped, that the state should take care of that child. How do you feel about that?
I'm not sure how the logistics of that would work, because the state taking care of the child essentially would just be putting the child in foster care, in my mind. But I don't understand the rationale behind having a child for the purpose of putting it up to the state to take care of it. Having a child for the purpose of having it suffer is not something that I can relate to. I don't understand the logic that goes into that decision.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Okay, Mr. Terrell, quickly.
Ms. Williams,
Yes.
hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for taking the time out to come and clearly present what was a well-researched presentation.
Thank you.
I have sat here on several occasions and I've heard persons indicate that from a psychological perspective, women who have been raped or women who have been the victims of incest, that those who have an abortion thereafter suffer more psychological trauma than if they were just raped and had the child. What is your view on that? There's also persons who have expressed the view that women who, for whatever reason, have an abortion, that they somehow suffer greater psychological impact. And one lady indicated that there was a lady who was in her, maybe I can't remember, somewhere like 70s or 80s, and she was going through this depression and psychological drama and everything else and stuff. What is your take on that?
All right, so first, the idea that women who have abortions suffer more psychological trauma. While I can't remember exactly where I read it, while I was doing my research for this, I did read about that, and it was deemed to be false, a false notion, that is not true. That women are not more likely to have mental illness problems because they have had an abortion. In fact, they are probably more likely to be more healthy because they have not taken on a responsibility that they did not want to take on. Concerning women who are raped, having children, and you're saying they have if they have the abortion,
they're essentially indicating that they were more likely to suffer psychological issues and psychological trauma by virtue of having the abortion as opposed to the rape.
Right.
Well, what are your views on that?
So I'm not a lawyer or a psychologist, but psychological trauma is a very individual thing. I don't think that you can make, or anyone can make, that kind of broad-brushed assumption. It could possibly happen that a woman who was raped and had an abortion could have some sort of mental breakdown as a result of not just the abortion but both issues, because she might find out later in life that she was robbed of maybe her one chance of having a child, but that's individual to that person. I don't think that we can generalize to say that women who are raped and have abortions generally have this issue. I would think that they would more likely have an issue having to look at the reminder of that trauma every single day of their lives.
All right, and two more. How would you feel about a referendum on the issue of abortion, letting the people decide, as opposed to a parliament deciding, or the church deciding, or I don't know, the private sector deciding? Yeah. How do you feel about that?
I think you can't assume what my decision is on the church deciding. Certainly, I don't think that's a decision for the church to make. I think there could be some referendum to get an idea of how people feel about it, but I don't think that that really should be the basis of the law in Parliament. I believe that Parliament has a responsibility to look at the facts. What is the fallout from women not having access to this procedure? Because a lot of times when people take polls, they are not honest, right? Because of stigma, right? It is stigmatized in Jamaica to have an abortion, so people might untruthfully say that they would not support it, but those are the same people who would get an abortion if they could get one. So I don't think a referendum should really be the basis on which a decision like this is made. It really should be fact-based, based on what is good for the people, based on what is good for women, and as I've presented in my argument, based on what women have a right to under our Constitution. All women should have autonomy over their own bodies.
Okay, and finally, if parliamentarians were asked to make a conscience vote?
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right, and I'll continue. Okay, absolutely not. But let's say, what would you say to parliamentarians who are, well, primarily men? What would you say to men who believe that it is their view, and it's not just parliamentarians, just men generally across society, because when you look at the parliament, so many different bodies, the church, the private sector, so many different bodies. You look at the presence of men at the top of the decision-making bodies in society. What would you say to men who believe that they should somehow weigh in on the discussion as it relates to what a woman does or does not do to her body? And some women say, I've heard women say that it is not the business of men to police the wombs of women.
Agreed.
I have heard women say a lot of things, but certainly if it were, that there was a conscience decision, what would you say to parliamentarians in the exercise of that conscience, bearing in mind that it's not their bodies?
I'm going to say that a conscience vote would not be one that would be in the interest of the Jamaican people. And I mean, honestly, I can't even think about it beyond that fact. But men having some sort of say in what women should do with their bodies, certainly they're entitled to their opinion. But to the extent that they don't live our reality, they cannot or should not be allowed to impose those beliefs on women, because we are the ones who have to live with your decision. You can make a decision, you don't have to live with it, so you can say anything. We are the ones who have to live with that decision, and that decision is not just one that lasts until tomorrow. That decision is one that lasts until the rest of your life. And that decision may cost some women their lives.
Thank you, Mr. Terry.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. I appreciate the commentary.
Yes, we're mindful of the time, Dr. Ferguson.
Yes. Just to, when we raise the question of conscience in the Parliament, let me just raise it so that we are all clear in the context of Parliament what it means. Because sometimes I believe if you are not voting by conscience, what it means is that the leader of any of the two, and when I say leader, yes, could be the Prime Minister, leader of opposition, and the whip, who takes a decision to say we are voting no. After we would have come to a committee like this, faced with evidence, facts, etc., if you're not voting by conscience, what it means is that you would be under the whip, whether it's government or opposition. And by being under the whip, the votes that you would need as a majority might never come, because nobody's willing to go against the whip or the dictates of the Prime Minister or the leader of opposition.
Well, that says a lot about the members of Parliament.
And I'm just telling you about what it is, what exists now. So it is not just, it is the same way that the presentations haven't been made, and with all the research, nobody as a parliamentarian, well, I can't say any parliamentarian, come into this parliament to discount the views of the church, irrespective of how the clarity of your arguments. And more so in the context of your own constituents. If you are referring to your constituents too. The church, whether you are Muslim or whatever else, we cannot discount that in Jamaica. And it does not say to me at this point that, again, having deliberated on it through this committee, the facts that are before us. Now, the majority of the Parliament, because remember, this is a committee of Parliament, and therefore it has to go back to Parliament to deliberate on it. One of the things that I've said in the past, Chairman, is that the presentations that are made here, especially the written ones, should be made available to all parliamentarians. Because it is 3 of us, 4 of us who are coming here to these meetings, and the media. The media sometimes I don't, to deliberate. But there are 62 plus the speaker. So if they are not privy, as we are, and it is just going to be on the basis of how they have felt historically and otherwise, we have a problem. So I would caution in our report, Chairman, that, and that's not difficult, that the body of information that we have received, and that person should be encouraged to read. Because I see at the end of the exercise, I remember well as Minister of Health, when we were dealing with HIV, AIDS, and all the issues and the question, certain questions were raised. And there was a debate taking place now about who should have access to care, and the groupings that would have had highest levels of HIV in Jamaica and so on. And there was a meeting called by the church in Offences. We would remember well, one of the biggest meetings Jamaica has seen, bigger than any political party meeting. And after that equality and health for all debate that was taking place almost just died a natural thing. And I'm not saying it was right. No. I'm just saying we have to take into account. And so you are the pro-choice and, you know, whatever positions you are taking, you also have to be aware of some of the issues that we are up against, and therefore take that into consideration, having done these brilliant research.
Just a question from me. How do the members of parliament reconcile taking into consideration the views of the church if for some reason those views are going to form the basis of any kind of law, and the freedoms that are guaranteed to us under the Constitution? If I don't believe what the church believes and you make that into law, how am I represented as somebody who voted you into power also?
That is why, to some extent, the question of the referendum has come on the table.
But we've seen what referendum does in countries like the UK.
I'm not asking for that, but I'm just saying the argument you are positing here is that if the law is not in keeping with those who voted you to come here, then you're actually saying then we should ask the views of those who voted us to come here to have a position rather than the parliamentarians having a position. My arguments are basically just to bring clarity and to make the arguments that are being presented, which are, as I say, excellent arguments have come forward in these deliberations. All I'm saying, it is not as simple in some regards as to how we deal with religion, irrespective of what our personal views on religion might be. I am going around. I was at a church service, a funeral last Saturday, and I don't know if it's because the pastor saw me as a parliamentarian, but he went off into a full sermon as it relates to the abortion law. Full sermon. And, you know, and after the service was over, he came and engaged me in discussion. So I'm just saying, they have a pulp, not just Sunday, many days of the week. And so it's not as simple, but I appreciate the frankness of our discussion. And I do believe that as we have these deliberations and as we report to the Parliament, that we must take into account some of the things that have beset Parliament taking decisions in whatever way on some of these critical matters of moment.
Okay. I would like the permission of the Chair to make a comment in relation to this part of the debate, please.
Please go ahead, Mrs. French.
Thank you very much. It really depends on what we defend as a country There is a commitment of many democracies to majority, yes, the majority rules. But we have also seen cases where the majority has murdered and killed and minorities with impunity. We are thinking about Nepal now and the Rohingya. There's lots of examples in the world. So we either believe in majority without principle, or we believe in human rights as principle, in which case we protect the human rights of all. So this parliament must now decide what it believes in. We are not a theocracy. No matter what the church says in Jamaica, we are not a theocracy. So we must go with what we know according to human rights principles are good and best for the people of Jamaica, because there are principles, human rights principles at stake here. And the biggest principle at stake here is whether this parliament believes that women are equal citizens with equal rights to have them protected from harm, the harm of unsafe abortion. Because if you believe that, then the law must be changed.
Thank you, Mrs. French, for your passionate intervention there. We are mindful of the time, and I'm now going to be asking the presenters of I'm Glad I'm at Girl Foundation to please go forward.
Acting Chairperson, Member of Parliament Michael Stewart, members of the Human Resources and Social Development Committee, members of the gallery, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Could you, yes, for the records, your names?
Right. I'm David Hilton. Beside me is Tajnali Shields, and we are from the I'm Glad I'm a Girl Foundation. The I'm Glad I'm a Girl Foundation of the Mary C. Cole Hall, UWI Mona, seeks to represent the voice of young women and girls in Jamaica in this ongoing conversation about women's bodies and the right to choose. We want the conversation to be seen through the eyes of the young women who are most affected by restrictive abortion laws. For this reason, we want to share with you stories from our friends, young women who would like to speak from a place of honesty but cannot, because our laws and our society say they cannot.
I want to introduce you to Imani. This is her story. I was a 21-year-old university student when I got pregnant. My boyfriend and I were in our second year of studies. We both knew we didn't want to have a child at this point. We wanted to complete our studies and find jobs before we had a child. I heard about the suction method from a friend and decided I wanted to terminate the pregnancy in that way. Upon asking around, I learned that it would cost $35,000. I could not afford that. I couldn't ask my parents for help. Someone else told me about pills I could use and where I could get them. These pills were called misoprostol, and they cost $12,000. My boyfriend and I had to put together to pay for them. The package included 8 pills. I was instructed to ingest 4 pills and to insert 4 in my vagina. I bled for a month. I went to a gynecologist when I realized that I was continuously bleeding and there seemed to be no change. I had to do a pap smear and an ultrasound when I told them I had an abortion. That was followed by a dilation and curettage procedure. I was not happy about having an abortion, and I am still sad about it. I made a decision that was about the life I wanted for myself and my family in the future. I was not prepared to put my life on hold to have a baby.
I speak on behalf of Sandra. It's my final year in university, and I realize that I'm pregnant. Careful me, who has planned my entire life up to this moment, and the baby was not a part of that. So how do I tell my parents who can barely afford university? What will they say? What will I do? It's 4 pregnancy tests later, and they all say the same thing. I'm pregnant. I can't keep it. I can barely take care of myself. I'm too close to the end of this degree. If I carry out this pregnancy, I'll have it at the peak of final exams. I check to see how far along I am. Okay, 6 weeks. Can I have an abortion? Google says I am still in the safe period and can get it done. Where do I get it? I call my friend panicking. Her procedure was $40,000. I can't afford that. I don't even have enough money for groceries. Please, God, don't let me have to ask him for help. Don't let me have to call him. I won't unless absolutely necessary. I call everyone I know who might have access to the pills. Google says that's still an accessible option to me. I have to call him. The other person who participated in the making of this pregnancy. I can't do this. If I carry out this pregnancy, I know I won't continue my education. I can't. My family will never let me forget this. They'll make me ashamed of my mistake, the hindrance to becoming the first university graduate of my family. I can't carry out this pregnancy with him. He's barely a good dad to his 2 children. I can't continue this pregnancy. I can't provide for it. I can't provide for myself. I'm barely able to make it to school without being exhausted from the walk. My back hurts. I'm nauseous. I just can't. He finally answers my message. I'm pregnant and I'm getting an abortion. I can get the pills, but I don't know where to get them. Can you help me? I'm relieved when he says, I can get the pills. Can you see me on Saturday? In 3 days, I head to his house and insert pills vaginally and take them orally. He leaves me at the house, and within 4 hours, I wake up in immense pain. I spend the next hours until 5 a.m. in the morning bleeding out in the bathroom. I didn't sleep. I head back to school the next day, and for 2 weeks, I bleed non-stop. I tough it out and go to my classes. I had no other option. The last Friday of the 2 weeks, while walking in the pouring rain, I squat on the road, unable to move, because I can feel my insides attempting to unravel. My friend holds my hand on the road, and we wait until the feeling passes. I am soaked in rain, and the only thing saving my pants are ultra maxi pads. I make it home, fumbling through the gates, feeling something forcing its way through my vagina. It's a clump of blood cells. I stare at it. I flush it down the toilet. I go back to becoming a graduate. I couldn't be a mother then. These stories tell us the hard truth of the matter, that young Jamaican women, are making difficult choices every day concerning our bodies, or personal circumstances, and our futures. Whether or not the law deems it appropriate to give us women our rightful choice, we will have to make one all the same. The question is, can we make one and do so safely? Access to safe termination of pregnancy services is a need that we have. We want to know if this committee agrees that since it is a need, it must be recognized and suitably addressed. We are not arguing for abortion, we are arguing for the right to have that choice. The law, as it stands, does not give us that right.
The World Health Organization makes it clear that unsafe abortions and the associated morbidity and mortality are totally avoidable, but are dependent on the availability of accessible and safe termination of pregnancy legislation. We say this with the following realities in mind. Unsafe abortions account for 13% of maternal deaths worldwide. 20% of the total mortality and disability burden is due to pregnancy and childbirth. Almost all deaths and morbidity from unsafe abortion occur in countries where abortion is severely restricted in law and in practice. Every year, about 47,000 women die from complications of unsafe abortions. An estimated 5 million women suffer temporary or permanent disability, including infertility, as a result of unsafe abortions. Importantly, where there are few restrictions on access to safe abortions, deaths and illnesses are dramatically reduced. We have observed that the conversation in Parliament thus far promulgates the idea that young women cannot be trusted to make the important decisions regarding our bodies and our future. It tells women that decisions concerning our own selves are not ours to make, and that the state should have more of a say about our bodies than we do. The conversation has also represented us young women as careless and not in charge of our own faculties. Anti-choice arguments have painted us as incapable. The laws governing termination of pregnancies, as they currently stand, undermine our capacity for decision-making and our bodily autonomy. The I'm Glad I'm a Girl Foundation recognizes that the burden of a pregnancy is primarily on the woman. A man may choose to support a woman through it, but the woman is the one who gets pregnant. A woman is the one who invests her body and the associated risk of a pregnancy. It is not a possibility for us women, it is a reality. As such, we should be able to assert that we may not want it. We believe that young women are fully capable of making decisions for ourselves. IGIG believes that Sections 72 and 73 of the Offences Against the Persons Act stand in opposition to the human rights of women. The United Nations in 2014 reported that countries with restrictive abortion policies have much higher levels of maternal mortality. The average maternal mortality ratio was 3 times greater in countries with restrictive abortion policies in 2013, where we saw 223 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births, than in countries with liberal abortion policies, where we saw 77 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births. We support the World Health Organization, which states clearly that access to safe abortions is a best practice in public health, and we support the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women that states clearly that access to abortion is a human right. We ask the committee to pay particular attention to vulnerable women and girls. We emphasize this particularly because we live in a society where rape, incest, and child sexual abuse undermine the girl child's human rights. Poor women are particularly disadvantaged as they cannot afford to access safe termination of pregnancy services. We know full well that women who can afford it are having abortions. It is in fact a socio-economic decision because women who can afford to pay for an abortion do so. It is the young and poor women that cannot bear the burden of a child that have the least access to abortion due to the restrictive laws that this country maintains from the time of post-slavery colonialism. The very laws that are in place to protect Jamaican citizens put girls at an unnecessary risk. We observe the inconsistencies in the law where the age of majority and the age of consent are concerned. The 2-year difference between them increases the risk of unplanned pregnancy and provides no way for adolescents to protect themselves. This shortcoming of the law is paired with the unwillingness of the education system to expose children to sex and sexuality education. It furthers the dilemma that girls face in protecting themselves, as they do not always have adequate information. We
support the recommendations of the Abortion Policy Review Advisory Group and make further recommendations to include all women of Jamaica that are uniquely vulnerable and have been mentioned, but for whom considerations were not made. The I'm Glad I'm a Girl Foundation's recommendations to the House of Parliament for the review of laws concerning abortion in Jamaica are as such. Section 72 and 73 of the Offences Against the Persons Act of 1864 should be repealed. Women and girls who become pregnant as a result of rape and incest should access safe termination of pregnancy services, and this shouldn't be dependent on the matter being resolved in the courts, as we are mindful of the low clear-up rates for rape in Jamaica and take into account the fact that most cases of rape go unreported. Pre- and post-counseling counseling and care should be available to any girl or woman who is unsure about her options and is considering medical or surgical termination of pregnancy. Any girl child should be able to access medical or surgical termination of pregnancy if after pre-care and counseling she demonstrates an inability or unwillingness to continue the pregnancy. Special provisions should be granted to women and girls who have been diagnosed with debilitating physical or mental illness for them to access medical or surgical termination of pregnancy. The Ministry of Health should set up and maintain facilities for medical and surgical termination of pregnancy. Private doctor's office may be assessed, registered, and monitored by the Ministry of Health and licensed to provide medical and surgical termination of pregnancies. Comprehensive sex and sexuality education should be accessible without the condition of parental consent. What the current laws say is that you don't trust us women with the capacity to make decisions about our own bodies. Patriarchal constructs tell us that we women are careless and unfit to make a choice. We are fit only as vessels for the process of reproduction. Abortion was moved from being a moral decision left to the personal conviction of those most involved to become a politicized decision forced to be deliberated and decided by older men that it affects the least. Access to safe abortions is a need that women have, a need that was denied for 155 years. How can old, white lawmakers in 19th century Britain make laws that have relevance to a 20-year-old Jamaican woman in 2019? The onus is on the House of Parliament to decide if they will give women the right to remedy that need. Do you trust us in making the decision for ourselves, or do you think we are not responsible enough? Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for your presentation. Members, are there any questions, concerns? Member Terry Long?
I'll jump out the bat on this one, and let me just say to both of you, as the State Minister with responsibility for the youth portfolio, that I am always impressed when young people come before the Parliament and they make presentations on behalf of the youth of Jamaica. So out the bat, I want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you for the well-researched presentation, and so thank you for having delivered that presentation devoid of emotion and theatrics and the drama. And so I just want to thank you for that. You have represented the young people of Jamaica well as it relates to coming before Parliament, and irrespective of the topic on which you have presented, my commendation is for two young, beautiful black Jamaican women who have represented themselves, their family, and the young people of Jamaica well, irrespective of the topic. So I found it very interesting, and you closed on such a powerful point as it relates to over 150 years ago, old white men in the United Kingdom made laws that would affect the colonies, and those laws still impact the lives of young women and men in Jamaica today. What are your views? If you were to, if you could say to politicians, look at what has happened in the United Kingdom today as it relates to their very permissive abortion laws versus these rather restrictive abortion laws that we still have in most of the colonies. There are other persons who don't realize that countries like Trinidad and other Caribbean nations, Barbados as well, that there are several countries within the Caribbean that actually have permissive laws as it relates to abortion. But what would you say to parliamentarians who still cling to this, and the rest of society generally, who still cling to this centuries-old law that, as you said, white men in the UK put in place that now affect young, strong, powerful, ought to be independent young black women right here in Jamaica who ought to have the right over their own bodies?
Okay, we'd like to reiterate what we've said, which is that the people who are most affected are young, poor women who don't have access to the same freedoms that richer women do. So a rich woman can easily take up herself and go to Miami for the weekend, have her abortion, or she can step into her doctor's office where her doctor will carry out that for her safely, no problems. Poor women are the ones who are suffering. Poor young women are the ones who are suffering. They're the ones who end up in the slip and slide ward. They're the ones who end up bleeding out on the road. They're the ones who end up putting themselves at risks and putting themselves up for death because they cannot access safe abortions. So what we'd say to the parliamentarians is consider them. Consider the women who are least privileged, who are at the heights of vulnerability in our country.
I would also add, I would also ask them to study the history and try to figure out why is it that they would feel so strongly about this, and why the white men in Britain are allowing their women, well, let me not say allowing, but, right? Is it that they value women's lives or their women's lives more than we value ours? Because when we talk about pro-slavery colonialism, we talk about the fact that that law wasn't in place before slavery was ended, because there was no reason for it to be. Our bodies belonged to the slave owner, and so they had to do what they wanted with our bodies. So now that we were free people, they still wanted to incentivize us to keep children for their labor force, which is why they forced us into that and still provided incentives in terms of financial. And so if you look at that and you look at the history, you start to think, is it really that Jamaicans do not care about women, that they wouldn't revisit this for the entirety of that 155 years?
And so you know, I mean, I speak to people on both sides of the divide, pro-choice, anti-choice. It's something I've always said in this committee, that everyone is pro-life. Everyone is pro-life, because the persons who I've had discussions with who are pro-choice as it relates to a woman's right to make decisions over her body, they all say, but we love children, we want people to have children. I mean, listen, we completely love life. All we're advocating for is the right for persons to be able to make a choice, the right for women to be able to make a choice when they're confronted with a particular decision, especially in circumstances of, let's say, rape and incest, etc., or, you know, a clear threat to the life of to the life or mental stability of women. But one of the things I've found is that persons have always said that our societies, and would you agree? I'm not the one saying so, you know, but would you agree with persons who say that, you know, our society tends to be very hypocritical, and they say that it's hypocritical simply because you mentioned the two Jamaicas, you know, I mean, one where uptown or women who have money or some sort of influence or affluence, they can certainly get this procedure done, whether it's in Miami or somewhere in a fabulous medical office somewhere, you know, and versus poor black women, marginalized, who are unable to have access to this secure abortion. But so there's the hypocrisy in that sense. And also, stemming from Ms. Williams' presentation, you could have the most restrictive laws whatsoever. In fact, even some of them who in at the church where jump up and abund the most fire about abortion, that. You've heard stories of, well, Sister Mary's daughter, who was at so and so and so, do you know that they took care of that issue? So do you agree, or does your research point to the fact that there's a sort of hypocrisy within our society as it relates to, one, the two Jamaicas in that regard, and also the fact that some of the same persons who have perhaps had access to abortion or have done abortion are sometimes often the same persons who are, as we said, bonfire or lick out? Is that your view, the hypocrisy of our society where abortion is concerned, as they say?
Okay, so for one, we do find pro-life advocates to be hypocrites. They don't care for life, they care for policing women's body. They care for policing women's bodies. What we actually do is call those persons anti-choice advocates, because we don't see them as being pro-life. There is in fact two Jamaicas, one where abortions are accessible and one where they aren't, or one where they're accessible in very, very unsafe ways, and that also plays into the hypocrisy of the system that currently exists. On the topic of people who, as Ms. Williams spoke about, there are people who, because of their status, because of their religious beliefs, because of their religious associations, will say publicly that abortions are wrong, will say that women should not have access to this. But in the same ways they do access these services, their family members do access these services, and we know that. We all know people who have had abortions, we all know people who you wouldn't expect to have abortions who have had them, people who are not always out there in the front saying, yes, women should have this access, but are still accessing these services. So yes, it is a hypocritical system.
And finally, Mr. Chairman, again, ladies, what would you say to young ladies who have had an abortion or who are thinking about an abortion as being in their best interest for one reason or another, whether it's rape, interest? I noted in your presentation you mentioned economic reasons. Would you like to say to them that stop shaming yourselves, or stop allowing others to shame you or to making you feel somehow ashamed, or that you're less than a woman, or that you're somehow an evil person or a monster because you have made a decision in your best interest or in the interest of your family? Is that something, I'm just asking, is that something that you would like to say to young girls or young women across Jamaica?
Definitely. we are aware of the fact that it's the stigma that really hurts women when it comes to abortion. As you were the question that you had earlier about their mental state after an abortion, it's really the stigma and how their families respond, how their friends respond, that actually negatively affects them, and most likely not the abortion itself. So we would like sex and sexuality education that would give them all the options that are available to them, and why there shouldn't be that negative stigma to it if they do choose whichever option they do choose. Right. Also, the pre and post counseling care would also help with that problem. And tell them to not. Sorry.
All right, thank you.
So
Don't
they should
coerce.
never feel ashamed. Also, the
Thank you.
Okay. Wait.
Yes.
The part with the hypocrisy. It's a part of the internalized misogyny where women think that I am the best woman there is, and I may choose to access abortion, but that is because X, Y, and Z, and I'm not like this careless one out there who's, just using dash your belly. But they don't know everyone's circumstances, and the fact that there is two Jamaicas, and they change their minds so flippantly, which is why we would like the law to be there for everyone to make that choice for themselves.
Mr. Stewart had an intervention before you. Member Cuthbert? Yes.
Thank you very much. Feel so marginalized. Thank you for recognizing me. Now, I heard the member say everybody's pro-life. Remember, well, the member wasn't here when I made my presentation. It is pro both lives, and not everyone can say that. Pro the life of the woman. We love women, and we love babies. We're pro the life of the woman and pro the life of the unborn baby equally. I also wanted to say I hear the preference for science, and I have presented scientific data that said that it is the poor that are saying no to abortion the loudest. And it is coming from the APRAG report that Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn has brought to the fore. This is data in the Hope Enterprise 2006 report. And repeatedly, presenters are saying, poor women, poor women, poor women. When the poor women spoke, they said, no to abortion. So I am at a loss if you're going to say you're going to abide by science because religion is too hard for you to decipher. Then stick to the science. Be obedient to the science and the evidence and the very research that was brought to the parliament. This is not foreign research that I am presenting here. And lastly, again, the maternal mortality ratio research shows Jamaica at 34. 34 deaths. Barbados is at 87. This is in 2008. This is in my PowerPoint presentation. So will the discussions need to rise to a level that abide by research data and not suppositions and subjectivity, if you say it's science you're using.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn?
Yeah.
Ms. Shields, you're yielding to her.
So the name for what you're doing right now, it's a phenomenon called mansplaining, right? Called mansplaining. So what you're doing basically is telling us what the actual situation is. When we know that poor women are the ones who end up on the slip and slide ward at the Jubilee Hospital. They're the ones who are suffering. They're the ones who are bleeding out and losing their lives.
Ms. Shields, the clerk wants to get that terminology that you used just now for the record. Mansplay.
Explaining from the point of view from the man.
You got it? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and I guess I only have one question.
Women's plate.
Let me just let me commend the two young ladies for their presentation. We haven't had a lot of I guess your age group coming in, so it is really good to see young people like yourself come into the Parliament to make your presentation. Because I think a lot of young girls out there are afraid or ashamed, and I think it's the cultural thing. It's a cultural fact or reason why I think a lot of the women won't come out and say. You mentioned education, sex education. What are your thoughts? Because I think that is something that is, again, different groups fight against. So we don't want abortion to happen. We don't want unwanted pregnancies. We don't want the children on the street. Yet we don't want contraceptive, and yet we don't want sex education. What are your thoughts on how possibly Jamaica should approach sex education in school? What are your thoughts on that?
So firstly, adolescents, teenagers, children, there isn't much information there about sex. And what we find is that is dangerous, because when you are having sex, because they do, when you are having sex, then you need to be informed. And you need to be informed from an early age. Actually, we would recommend that you start sex and sexuality education from early on, so that children at different stages are exposed to different things and understand different concepts, so that you don't find a situation where a girl believes a man when he says if you have sex with a virgin, your HIV will be cured. Those are things that girls in Jamaica actually believe and are actually a hindrance to girls in Jamaica recognizing their sexual and reproductive rights. Sorry, yeah.
We don't want Mrs. Sterling to feel marginalized. I'm giving him the final word.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. So, impugning my integrity is what that was taken as. In science, when a point is made and it cannot be refuted, sometimes, I don't know, sometimes the opponent may resort to an ad hominem attack. Will they look on you and call you bullfrog or something like that, because they have no response. I took the stance, the affinity to science, because the beautiful lady to my right was putting down religion. I do believe religion is one of the ways of knowing. She doesn't. So she says science. I am using the science from Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn's resurrected Aprag. I know, but you resurrected it.
That is, and I think you need to stop referring to it as my study.
You brought
that
it
was
back.
not my study. Yes, this was in 2008. We're now at 2019.
No, but Miss Cuthbert Flynn,
one at a time, please. Could we listen, Mrs. Flynn?
Cuthbert Flynn, Chairman, I was there the first time, and we had successfully buried that report. Mark Golin was there, and he was saying, so it's a bad report by the time we had been finished with it, right? But,
Mr. Stewart, let us not castigate each other.
I say that to say Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn has dug it back up.
Yes.
I am using research from the Hope Enterprise from it. It's not mine.
Yes, your point is well made. Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. Finally, Member Ferguson.
Just to say, Chairman, I too want to congratulate the two persons, young ladies, who have made their presentation with confidence. And I do believe this afternoon, Chairman, that we have had some spirited presentation that have evoked much debate. There were, I think, 3 presenters pro-choice, And Mr. Stewart says he's boat life, pro boat life. And, but the truth is, Chairman, that the presentations were well researched. It is what the committee and the Parliament is looking for, where ideas can be brought to the table. This is a long-standing issue of national moment, and to the extent that we are, as parliamentarians, are bringing in critical stakeholders to make their arguments for or against, and the Parliament in the end must take a position. It is time.
Thank you, Dr. Ferguson. Mrs. Maxwell, finally.
Thank you very much. Like Member Terry Long here, I'm so proud of my sisters here from Mary C. Cole Hall. I'm glad I'm a girl too. Just to say as well that we must remember that as long as abortion remains illegal, women will not come out and speak about it. I encourage persons to look online for something called the abortion monologues, where we have women from all classes speaking about their abortions. Many have come out and said it is the best thing that they could have done. It saved their lives. And that is the reality.
Thank you, Mrs. Maxwell. Members, I want to thank on your behalf our presenters this afternoon. As Dr. Ferguson said, Member Ferguson said, they have been very brilliant, well researched, and they have given food for thought. And I know the dialogue will continue, and we commend you, and we look forward to further presentations. Just some housekeeping matters here. Next week we will not meet. We will change that date to the 3rd of July, where we'll have the Gatekeepers Town Community Development Foundation. We have a joint submission from Professor Marco Binz. We have Professor Wendell Abel and Dr. Althea Bailey and Professor Opal Adisia. And then on the 17th of July, we will now have Professor Caroline Cooper and another group called Hear Me Now, Caribbean Association for Feminist Research and Action, and from the PNP Women's Movement, and Dr. Frederick Nunes. Those persons will make in presentation. I want to thank you for coming this afternoon. Yes, finally, Mrs. French?
Question. I didn't hear you mention, I may just have not heard. Women and Men for Women's Reproductive Freedom and Autonomy?
Yes, yes. Women and Men for Women's Reproductive Freedom
And that's
Autonomy.
what date?
And that will be on the 3rd of July.
On the 3rd of July.
Right.
Okay, and Women's Empowerment for Change?
Also the 3rd.
Also on the 3rd of July. So all that was on the 19th of June now goes to the 3rd of July.
Yes, yes.
And the 3rd of July now goes to July 17th.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me thank you all for coming and for your participation. Thank our very responsive audience up there for listening so attentively. And we know that we have all learned a lot this afternoon. The motion is in order for the adjournment. Moved by Member Ferguson, seconded by Member Flynn. Thank you. This meeting stands adjourned until the 3rd of July. Thank you all.
We know times are hard, but can selling your vote really make a difference in your life?